Well, continuing on this story, I'm joined live now by former Justice of the Supreme Court of Victoria, Professor Kevin Bell. He's the Faculty of Law at Monash University. Thank you for your time, Professor.
Thank you, Holly.
Great to have your company. Now, the jury has found Derek Chauvin guilty of all three charges here. Can you just give us an overview of what exactly has unfolded in this monumental moment?
We have seen the verdict welcomed all around the world. We've seen strong statements from President Biden down to the effect that this should be the start of a long reform process. We've seen, perhaps most importantly of all, George Floyd's family get some joy at justice having been done in their individual case. We've seen the people of Minneapolis go to bed peacefully at night because there was no need for an eruption of anger at what would have been seen to be an unjust verdict, and in my view would have been an unjust verdict.
I think we all agree with you there. What kind of response would we have seen if it had have been an unjust response?
Well, we have hope now. A step has been taken towards justice, not just for George Floyd and his family, but for everybody. We're able to say that a police officer who stood on a man's neck with his knee for 9 minutes and brought about his death has been held accountable according to the processes of criminal justice for that wrong. If that had not happened, as has not happened in so many cases in America and indeed elsewhere, the culture of impunity, the feeling that there is justice for some but not for all, would have, I think, given rise to a lot of anger and a lot of justified anger. But we're in a different space. We're in the space of feeling that we are taking steps towards not just justice for George Floyd and his family, but for all people of race, all people of colour, true equality. But there's a long way to go. By no means have we got there, and that point's been made by many commentators, and I join in making that remark.
Absolutely. When George Floyd was killed, it sparked global protests right around the world. It's an issue,
yes.
A wider issue of systemic racism that we're seeing here.
Yes.
And as you said, George Floyd's brother did speak out today after the verdict, saying that this isn't just for George, this is for everybody around the world. What do you think we will see in regards to the global response to this now as well? Will we see changes in society? Will this force a shift in change?
I think it will. The Floyd case is very strongly linked to the Black Lives Matter movement, which has gained strength all over the world, including here in Australia. And so, for a time, it became possible to relate to those who are more likely to come in contact with the police. In our country, Aboriginals. To those who in contact with the police are more likely to be charged, Aboriginals. To those who charged are more likely to be sent to jail, Aboriginals. To those who, when sent to jail, are more likely to die in jail rather than to live there, Aboriginals. So I'm using the example of black deaths in custody in Australia as an example of the kind of racial discrimination that exists all over the world, including in America. So the cause of true equality consists in valuing black lives in the criminal justice system. But it also consists in understanding that that black people, other vulnerable people, need housing, they need work, they need health, they need access to all of the services which enable them to thrive as human beings, therefore not to come in contact with the criminal justice system. Therefore, this case feeds, I think, a true sense of hope, a true sense of anticipation, an understanding that human rights in all of their dimensions, not just in respect of the fair trial that we have seen here, but in these other aspects, can really truly be achieved.
Absolutely. And I mean, moving forward, obviously, you've worked in the Supreme Court. What do
Yes.
you think are the most likely, sentences that we're going to be seeing unfold for Derek Chauvin?
Well, he clearly is facing a very substantial sentence. I'm not an expert in American sentencing law and not in the state of Minnesota by any means, but any reasonable expectation would be to the effect that he's facing a substantial period of time in jail. He's a 45-year-old man with a blemish-free record to date, which will count in his favour. But his criminal acts bringing about this death are really very serious, callous in the extreme. We'll see some strong language used by the prosecution to describe what it is that he's done. In this regard, can I just make the point that we have here 4 police officers, one of whom brought about directly the death, 3 of whom stood by when it happened. I do appreciate that the Minnesota Police Department gave evidence against the Derek Chauvin in the trial and therefore in favour of George Floyd and the prosecution. That's a very good thing. I commend them. But there is clearly much to do by way of training in that police department. That 4 officers could have thought that this was a reasonable thing to do. There is a systemic problem in that force. This could not have happened. 4 of them, not just one, 4 of them were involved in this extraordinary act, which was filmed by that brave bystander whose bravery and compassion in the face of George Floyd's unfolding death, I think must be celebrated as a great act of humanity. And from this side of the world, to her I say thank you. I express my thanks and the thanks of my community for standing by and bearing witness to a man's death. And what she did has enabled justice to be done, not just for him, but for everybody.
Absolutely, I can completely agree with you there, Professor, because if she hadn't have filmed that, then we would be sitting here having this conversation that we're having. Would we be having that conversation?
I'm not sure.
Would anyone believe it?
I don't. Well, that's been the pattern in these trials. Oath against oath, fearful people, police officers trained to give comfortable in courts, being in a position of power in that process, up against people usually disempowered, not comfortable in that process, and the victor very often and too often indeed is the killing police officer. Hence, this idea that police officers are impune, that they're not accountable, that they don't have the same responsibility to the criminal law which others have, which black people have. Now, this trial has set a new pattern. It's set a pattern that police officers are equal before the law and therefore are criminally responsible. But you need evidence in order to bring that about. You need people to feel a sense of compassion towards someone in the position like George Floyd. You need to have people with sufficient strength of character to understand that their presence there bearing witness will ultimately mean something in a system of justice that will treat their evidence as serious, which will treat their role as a citizen bearing witness as serious. And that's happened in this case. And justice has won, the system has won. But just in George Floyd's case, what now needs to happen is for some deep reflection by the Minnesota Police Department on how this could have happened, how 4 trained police officers with 2 decades of service could possibly have thought that this was a reasonable thing to do. And more importantly, how it is that people like George Floyd have a passage in life of disadvantage, of disempowerment, of bad health, of addiction, of unemployment, which makes them more likely to come in contact with the police, to be charged, to be in jail, and to suffer the consequences.
Absolutely. Some really powerful words there from you, Professor. And as US President Joe Biden said today, that this is a giant step forward in the march for justice, but there is a long way to go in the fight for racial justice in the US and right around the world for that matter. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. I really appreciate your insights on this.
Thank you, Holly.